Good morning. Next up, we have Speed Round, Top Trends in Entertainment You Need to Know with Kristen McLean.
Thank you. Thank you. The first thing I'm going to start by doing before I get into anything else is to suggest that you guys may want to move here because there's going to be data on the slides and may be hard to see across the podium. So just an idea. I'm Kristen McLean. I'm the executive director of an organization at Circana called the Circana Entertainment Knowledge Group. I'm also really pleased to have the rest of my team here, including Kelly Thacker, who runs our toys business, and Brian Hackett, who is the go-to for questions about our data. So you guys may not know what Circana is, but I guarantee you guys are aware of our data because we just had our 50th anniversary of tracking toys data here in the US and our 30th anniversary of tracking toys data globally. We used to be called NPD. A couple of years ago, we came together with another large data company called IRI that was known for their CPG tracking. And now we are this larger global research group, and we are the toys data of record globally. Now, I could spend the whole time just talking about all the things that we do at Circana because we track lots of different industries and we track them in lots of different markets, but I thought I would just give you a summary of some of the high points just so you can understand what's so cool about what we do now in the context of your business. So we are tracking data in 23 countries, and collectively that represents about 75% of the world's GDP. We're in 26 different industries in CPG, consumer packaged goods, and general merchandise. We are tracking 2,000 categories. We have 1,900 industry partners around the world, and we are taking in POS data from about 500,000 storefronts globally. We have a really cool division called Circana Media, and this is audience tracking. And we track 30 million products, which is about 96% of US households. So that's the largest data set of its kind right now in the market. And here in entertainment, which is what I cover, we are listening for 3,000 entertainment licenses, and we are the top experts in toys, books, video games, media entertainment, and juvenile. So now that we have this expanded view of CPG, we're starting to really roll out this expertise, not only in our verticals in entertainment, but across the whole retail landscape. And it's really exciting for someone like me who's an analyst. But all those numbers, really don't mean anything. I think the reason that people work with us is because we are really interested in the meaning behind the numbers, right? Data is actually not the problem. There's data everywhere. You probably have experienced what happens when there's too much data and you can't make sense of it. So we are really interested in what it means and why it matters to you. And so today I'm hoping to give you guys a quick look at some of the key trends in entertainment and just demonstrate what we mean by that. So I'm going to start with what I call setting the table. So just some basic views to help you understand what's going on in toys and entertainment. And then I'm going to break down what I consider to be the top trends that anybody in entertainment really needs to understand right now in order to be able to make good strategic decisions for their business. And then we'll finish up with a little bit of a summary of the sort of so what, now what? What do you do with that? Okay, so let's just talk about what's been happening in the last year for toys and entertainment, starting with toys. So here is a year-over-year view of dollars, units, and ASP. That's actual selling price for the toy market. And the bullet here is that the toy market is close to flat in 2024 compared to 2023. We had a super volatile period in all of our entertainment categories in the pandemic. I'm sure everyone here is aware of that. But I think what's really interesting about 2024 is that we started to see that normalize, right? It's flat because has been a lot of pressure economically, and to be frank, we have another year of that at least ahead of us. So we started to see some trade-offs in entertainment behavior against higher prices in non-discretionary categories, particularly food, right? But overall, the entertainment industry was trending back towards a much more normal pattern in 2024. And when we look at 2019, the toy industry, the dollar sales have increased by 26% against 2019. Some of that is rising prices, right? But a lot of it is the fact that people invested in quite a lot of toys and other entertainment categories during the pandemic. Now, when we put toys in the context of our other three categories where we track POS, now this is just US here. You see video games in the bottom in the purple, you see toys in the pink, and books in the peach. Toys and video games were both down a little bit, right? So video games followed toys directionally. Books was our only category which was up. Now this is on a dollar basis. So books were up almost 3% on a dollar basis, up 1% in units. So books was the best performing entertainment category last year. But again, even there, we started to see some flattening compared to what we saw during the pandemic. 2021, you can see how this bar chart steps down. 2020 and 2021 were like high water marks for entertainment. And all of our categories have stepped down from there. But we've established a new benchmark, in my opinion, for entertainment. And the outlook for entertainment is pretty good going into 2025, even with the economic uncertainty, because in our categories, when the market goes down and people get challenged, typically we see good sales in entertainment as people turn to our categories for distraction, escapism, taking care of their kids in difficult times. There may be trade-offs in what people choose to buy, but overall, entertainment is one of the most protected categories for consumer spend in a difficult market. These are the top 10 properties in our toy data. And there's not a lot of surprises here. If we looked at this list last year, it would be very similar. I think first of all, I want to call out Pokemon, 30-year-old brand, for being not only the top property here, but the top property globally last year. And that's awesome. It also points out the fact, though, that one of the things that's happening in all of our entertainment categories is the big brands are just sitting at the top of the list. And it's very difficult for new brands to break in at this scale. And also, if you look at the directional arrows, you can see that Lego and the NFL, Lego Botanicals, were the top two here to grow, and the rest of these saw some erosion last year. These are the top 10 growth properties last year. Also a really interesting list, because aside from Sonic, which had a movie, the rest of these were driven by non-traditional or new, whatever you want to call it, new patterns of consumption, discovery, and influence, which I think really points at the fact that we are in the middle of a transition over how brands are driven in the current entertainment market, right? And we're going to talk a little bit about why that is in just a minute. So yeah, Sonic was a movie. Next year we see Lilo and Stitch come to theaters. But overall, this is all about fanship. This is about engagement. So if you look at Lego Ideas, I think that's really interesting, right? We'll talk about that in a second. Bluey, #1 breakout brand in the United States over the last few years. Definitely, maybe not the last traditional new entrant, but definitely a transitional entrant from the more traditional linear media model to the new model. Okay, so now we're going to talk about deeper trends. So the #1 thing that I think is really important to understand right now is that the bigger brands are not actually getting bigger. And this goes back to the slide where I showed you the top properties and mentioned how many of those properties would have been on the list last year, in the year before, and going back, right? We're not seeing a lot of turnover and movement at the top of the list, and not just in toys. This is a 30-year trended view of the total property value in our US toy data, and this is adjusted for inflation. We went back and adjusted. And this is basically showing you 3 segments of the total property list. So we have the brands that are, the total property is worth $250 million or more on an annual basis in the peach. We've got 100 to 250 in pink, and 50 to 99 million in the top in purple. So the first thing is look at those properties in the purple, right? 50 million to 250 million. They've more than doubled their value in 30 years and doubled the number of properties that are sitting on that list. The medium brands have done okay. Directionally, they've come up, and then they're underperforming a little bit in terms of the number of brands reaching that level. And then those number of properties that are sitting at 250 million have not increased all that much. There are not that many brands that are making it to the 250 million level. And I think that if you are a major IP holder, this is a challenge. You basically have to invest more to keep your place in line, right? So we're seeing all the investment that's required to keep these big brands on top. And we're seeing the real velocity coming from those smaller, I mean, not that 50 million is small, but smaller brands. So a lot of the breakout brands we've seen in the last few years, Cocomelon, Lanky Box, those are all, Gabby's Dollhouse right now, next year it's going to actually probably move up, are sitting in that $50 million range. So if you are an existing IP holder, legacy IP holder, you're putting a lot of resources into just keeping your spot in line. But if you do have a smaller brand, it means there's more room in the market for you to move up, but it's very competitive. So the big takeaway here is that if you are going to grow in this market, you are going to take share from someone else. There's not a ton of white space, and it's getting more and more noisy. So expect to have a strategy where you're looking at your competitors, trying to figure out where you are in relation to them and how you can compete better, compete smarter to take share. Okay, this is related, right? This is the fact that there's an extremely high bar to get new properties to scale and crowded once you get there. That's just the follow-on from what I just said. Here is the global box office for 2025 that we have pegged as being the most toyetic movies coming. We're feeling optimistic about this year. This is much better than what we saw in 2024. So we do expect that licensing is going to continue to drive a lot of business in 2025. And the projections for the box office are good. However, look at this list. Can you see one movie on this that is brand new, really brand new, right? There's really only one. And it's coming out of Disney, meaning it's got the full push, full press of the studio behind it. All the rest of this is brand extensions, reboots, reimaginings of other media coming onto the screen, right? So Gabby's Dollhouse will push that IP out. Stranger Things, push that IP out. But by and large, it's these types of licenses are sitting on that $250 million line, and they are taking up all of the air at the top of the market right now. So the follow-on to this is that these are, we would consider this a tentpole strategy, right? You put a movie out and then you release all of the merchandise to go with it. The tentpole strategy, the sort of highs are lower and the tails are longer. And it's a real challenge, frankly, at retail because all the retailers are being shown all of this IP. And that if you have a new IP that isn't one of these or that isn't tied to a traditional license, it's challenging to get your merchandise onto the shelf because there's a lot of competition. One of the trends that I think is really important, and many of you here might actually already be using this strategy, is nostalgia. So we are seeing this play out everywhere, not just in our entertainment categories, but in our apparel categories, in our accessory categories, even in some of our food categories, right? So this is the idea of reviving an old favorite and giving it a modern twist, a lot of emotional content, right? So you want your consumer to look at that and be like, oh, and then buy it, right? So emotional buying is a really important thing that's happening right now around this. And I think that nostalgia and nostalgia are super important drivers for the next couple of years because as economic times get rough, people want to feel better. And nostalgia is one of the ways that we create products that resonate, especially if they're at a good price point. Not always, they can be expensive too, we'll talk about that, but generally, I think that the trend here is to have an emotional connection with the consumer on the shelf or on the screen that motivates the purchase. And that can happen in terms of impulse, so it can happen with impulse product all the time, or it can happen with extremely high-end products. But I think the best example of nostalgia of the last couple of years is what Nostalgia did with Barbie around the movie. So they created a nostalgia version of their IP for apparel and other categories that appealed to adults. Zara and The Gap, for instance, were two rollouts of that kind of old nostalgic adult apparel. And then they made a brand new variant for kids that was poppier and fun. We saw it all over kids' pajamas and other stuff like that. And so the idea of IP variants in the market at the same time to capture different ends of the market is very effective if you have the resources and the footprint to do that. Okay, third trend, the diffusion of discovery. So this is the proliferation of platforms, influencers, and the breakdown of traditional types of things like linear TV that are causing a atomization of the way that people find out about your brand and just tracking how they know about it, right? We were up here yesterday and saw the TikTok panel that was happening, and that was super interesting to hear how the agencies and TikTok are thinking about helping people advertise on their platform. And it had to do with figuring out the emotional message for each advertiser's brand and then finding influencers that could deliver that emotion to their followers. And then very intentionally going out and seeding that brand with those messages, right? So this is next gen marketing on a place like TikTok, right? A year ago, it would have all been about organic discovery, and now it's really we're becoming much more sophisticated about it. So the question really is, like, how do you cover all the ground that you need to cover to find your consumers? Because we do still have linear. We do have YouTube, which in my opinion is going to be is now and will be the most important platform for reaching kids moving forward. But then we have the retailers, and we have all our traditional marketing, and we have our paid advertising, and we have our Q4, and we have our occasions. It is a lot. And this is a kind of bit of an eye chart, but this is demonstrating what happens across entertainment when you do this. So this is coming from our SVT service, which is streaming video on demand. And this is a time lapse of viewership across these platforms with Netflix on the left and Apple TV on the right. So you can see what happens is as people adopt more platforms, as people tune into more channels, the viewership and the engagement on any one channel starts to erode, right? So this is true for SVT. This is true for social media. This is true for all of the ways that people are tuning in. And now that we're in this, heading into what I consider to be pretty challenging economic moment with a lot of news, this is going to become even more so. Like, not only are we losing attention to other channels, and we're also losing attention to the news and other people's concerns about what's going on in their lives. This is a super important slide. So this is showing attention technology adoption across time by generation. So you probably have seen technology adoption slides that show here's the car and here's the color television and whatever. This is just attention technologies, meaning platforms that we have used since the 80s to capture attention. So you can see that Gen X, my generation, we got color TV and cable, right? The next generation, millennials, got personal computing, the internet, and cellular phones. Gen Z, first native smartphone, social media, and podcast audience. Now we're at Gen Alpha, right? These are the kids we're trying to sell to right now. This is stacking up for them. So they are coming into an environment where they are super inundated, and their families are super inundated with messages and attention grabbing. And also, I have a Gen Z at home. They're also going to be among the most sophisticated consumers that we have seen because they have access to so much information. My Gen Zer is extremely sophisticated in what they choose to consume and where they choose to get their stuff, and also aware of content coming from overseas and whatever their latest passion project is in a way that previous generations never have. There are some knock-on effects, though, of all of this attention grabbing. So Fred, who's our global toy analyst here yesterday, has been tracking the decline in the kids market for toys and looking at, particularly for girls, looking at where that attention is going and where it's shifting. And there's a big story out of our beauty group, because we track beauty globally, that one of the strongest drivers in beauty right now are kids, the so-called Sephora kids, who are coming out of influence culture and are asking for not toys, but beauty products and clothing. So these Sephora kids, this is some of the data. We saw a 24% increase in beauty buying in households with kids. And when we ask parents, in high-income households, I should say, over 100,000, right? High-income households. And when we ask parents for kids 6 to 11 what they've been purchasing, we see hair care, we see skin care, we see makeup and fragrance. Okay, so this is, we talk about play versus display, right? So a trend away from play and towards other types of behaviors. I would also argue that this is a byproduct of this information, all the information that these kids are getting, and so I don't expect that this is necessarily going to change. So the question is, as a toy industry, where we are in the business of play, how do we build this into our strategy? I'm not suggesting that you suddenly start putting things on the shelf at Sephora, but if you have been to FAO Schwarz, you know that they have a beauty bar in FAO Schwarz. We know that Disney has done the Bibbidi Boppidi Salon now for more than a decade, right? So we are seeing this intersection already, but I think this is really important. And also thinking about whether or not kids want to play with toys that like emulate certain behaviors like cooking, or whether or not they just want to cook. Like if they're really sophisticated, like what does pretend play mean anymore, right? These are really important questions. Oh, this comes from Fred, right? So just putting an underline on the fact that we're seeing girls erode more than boys, and 34% of total, that girls accounted for 34% of total toys in 2021, but only 30% in 2024, right? So a 4% decline since 2021. Now the flip side of that, and people here are probably aware of this trend, but we can't emphasize it enough, is what's happening on the upper end of the market, right? With adults buying toys. So we've been talking a lot in our work with clients about desire and indulgence for adults and what's happening on the upper end of the toy market. So right now, I think, Fred, is this EU5 and US, this slide? Okay, so this is EU5 and US. Recipients of toys 12 plus are 31% of dollar sales, right? So a third of the toy market in the EU5 and the US is going to 12 plus. And we do see quite a lot of buying on the upper end of the market. And the strong categories there would be building sets, collectibles, licensing, right? So I think that we are trading kids for an older consumer, and a consumer that's driven a lot more by emotion, fanship, collecting, escapism. To some degree, games and puzzles are up, right? So some of that is driven by family and wanting to spend time with friends. But this is really important. And one of the concerns with this part of the market is if these guys are coming in for, say, Lego Botanicals and doing it as a art activity, how do we hold these people in our business, right? What happens if these older toy consumers dry up or go away or shift their attention to something else? Okay, so now we're going to go from the demographics to where the content is coming from, and also shift from challenges to opportunities. I think that we in the toy market have always traditionally had partnerships and global collaboration, particularly around our manufacturing. But one of the things we're seeing is what's happening with content and culture globally, right? So one of the byproducts of having all these attention technologies in our household is now we're seeing a much wider appetite for global content and for what is really hitting here in the US. So think about Squid Game, for instance, right? Think about some of the pop groups that have come from Asia into the US market. Think about Emily in Paris, right? So we are seeing a stronger appetite for global content. Manga grew by over 300% during the pandemic because people discovered anime on the streaming platforms, and it just created a whole new market for manga here in the US that has come down but not gone away. So thinking about where the centers of cultural influence are and where the centers of creative influence are. So we are seeing lots of trends, and you see them here. I can see them just looking out right now of a much stronger appetite for overseas aesthetic. So we pulled this kawaii slide together just to give you some examples, but we could do the same thing with a couple of other different types of content from EMEA and other parts of the world. So on the top line here, you see Woobles, Jellycat, and Zuru. These are 3 brands that have taken the kawaii aesthetic and brought it into a much more mainstream US representation. When we look at our beauty data down below, we see kawaii all over Chinese and Korean beauty, right? So this super cute packaging of beauty. Guzi is something, if you haven't, this is brand new to us. We just flagged this week. This is a trend in China towards hyper collecting, and it is a huge, huge market in China. So these are particularly women collecting, like if you go and look at the videos, unboxing extremely expensive collectibles, and it extends to figurines, but it's not just. There are accessories and other things like that, but it's a massive, massive market. And we're talking like hundreds of dollars per figurine. So hyper collecting. And then there are dozens of Japanese snack boxes on the market right now that are being delivered. So there's just a kind of broadening of taste in a way that's really interesting at this moment. I will say Emily in Paris is the other really strong example. You know, we look at the influence of Emily in Paris on on home goods, on fashion. Like, we could make this case for lots of different kinds of content. It is generally starting, though, in influence culture and on streaming. So as we see platforms like Netflix bring in more content from overseas, or commission content that is translated across markets, we will see more and more of this. So I talked about that's the aesthetic influence. Now let's talk about the incubators. Where do we find innovation? Because in this noisy market where everyone's attention is being taken by all of these platforms and there's just a lot to take in, how do we innovate? Especially in a market where our retail partners are hesitant to take new stuff, where our largest IP holders need to just do line extensions because it's a safer bet and it also helps the consumer anchor to their products. So how do we innovate? I think it's really, really important to look for incubators for innovation. And I also think that despite all the pressure towards reboots, lines extensions, and familiarity and nostalgia, innovation is something that actually consumers crave. And it's going to be really important for breaking out in this type of super saturated market. So there are 3 different kinds of incubators that we are looking at that I would encourage you to think about in your business. So the first is aesthetic incubators. This is what I just talked about, right? Where are the cultural influences coming in that are getting traction with our consumers? So this is cool hunting. You need to pay attention. Get some Gen Zers in your staff to track this for you if you don't have a tracking service. But just pay attention to what they're excited about. And I'm going to put in a plug for a newsletter called After School. It's a Substack. It's Casey, I remember her last name. If you just search for it, Casey, I think it might be Casey Lewis, but I'm not positive. She's the #1 Gen Z cool hunter, in my opinion, and worth every penny to subscribe to her stuff. She's very, very good at it. So Emily in Paris, Pingu. Pingu is originally a Swiss series that has been out of circulation but was bought by Mattel with the Hit Entertainment purchase, and they're going to be rebooting Pingu with Aardman Entertainment over the next couple of years. So this is a very this sort of has a lot of nostalgia elements to it, but it's also fresh and new. I think Mattel's super smart to bring it back. And then Min K-Beauty, there's just this whole aesthetic around Korean and Chinese beauty. The second incubation that we have been looking at is content, right? I just came off Kidscreen in San Diego a couple weeks ago and was paying a lot of attention to not just what content was coming in, but where it was coming in. And I really believe that there are a couple of content markets where they have very strong film and TV support structures where we're seeing a lot of interesting content come in. I flagged Australia and Korea, South Korea as 2 that I'm seeing right now particularly strong. I mean, Bluey came out of Australia, right? We need these markets where they do invest in create strong creator cultures and a kind of smaller market where they can be more nimble, and then that content can come into the US. So I would be looking to these markets for the IP that is being created there, and I would look early, and there are some others. And what's interesting about this is the aesthetic is separate from the content. So in some cases, we're seeing collaborations in EMEA and Asia and Australia for content that feels like it's coming out of someplace other. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get Asian content out of Asia, but it does mean that there are these markets where they're very, very good at nurturing interesting IP. And then the third is ideas. And I think this is the most accessible to everybody here in this room, right? For years in the toy market, in the entertainment market, we have been slapping cease and desist letters on people who have fans, not everybody, but it's sort of a pattern, that we do not like fans taking our products and our images and using them to make independent products. I think that has to stop, and I think that the most successful companies that are right now embracing fanship, and I want to call out Lego Ideas down there on the right, our video game partners are also very good at this. They actually love their fans. They let their fans run wild with their IP in many cases, and the best in class take those ideas and integrate them back into their line. So Lego Ideas is the kind of Mac Daddy of doing this. So, but you don't have to just do that. I mean, I would encourage you to look to these types of platforms. DeviantArt is another one that is not on the slide. And I would be looking for what kind of interesting things are happening in the creator culture that you can then use as inspiration. And I would consider taking the most creative of those people and consider collaborating at a minimum with them. So we were up in the Mattel booth yesterday, and I was really impressed with some of the creator collaborations around things like Uno, right? So higher end product that's done with collaboration with artists. And we're seeing some of our biggest brands in the US market use this very effectively to create excitement, time boxing, right? How do you take, if you're Oreo or Stanley Cup or whatever, how do you create excitement? Well, you create excitement by doing limited edition releases and then getting fans to buy into those. So Oreo is, for me, the #1 brand in the CPG space that's doing this. They've got nostalgia going on. They've got collaborations going on. I think their Mario Oreos are selling for like $500 on eBay right now. So just thinking about like how do we scale and use creative ideas, collaborations, and just creating a moment that's emotional for our brand using independent creators or time boxing. Okay, number 6. I'm going to tell you a story. Earlier this year, one of our CPG companies that makes a major brand of mayonnaise reached out and said, oh my God, on TikTok, they're crushing Cheez-Its and they're putting it in mayonnaise and they're putting it on sandwiches. Should I release a Cheez-It mayonnaise? And we're like, no. Do not release a Cheez-It mayonnaise. It's a really bad idea. Not only will you miss it because it's gone like that, but also they don't want your Cheez-It mayonnaise. They want to make their own Cheez-It mayonnaise. They want to have a creative hack on TikTok. And there's so many examples of this. And one of the things that we're seeing is that virality, particularly on TikTok, is moving so fast that you cannot keep up with it. Your product cycle will never keep up with it. So part of what we're suggesting, particularly in CPG, but I think it's true also, it's also true on our side of the market, is what you're really looking for is what is making people excited about that brand in that moment, and then actually bringing that brand out as the center of a creative impulse, but not trying to change it, and in some cases, bringing it back down to its essence, right? So don't make a Cheez-It mayonnaise, just highlight that your mayonnaise is the best mayonnaise on the market, and it's familiar, and it's been around, and look what you can do with it, or engage in that, but don't try to create it. I think that originality, so this idea of going back to brand essence, not putting too many messages on it, not trying to oversell it, but go back to the essence of the brand, really trying to get back to that emotional quality of the brand is the #1 thing you can do for your IP. And in some cases, if you have legacy IP, that means going back to nostalgia or nostalgia, but not just. I think that there's a taste for right now, like really good quality stuff at a good price point. So really thinking about delivering something that resonates at the right price point. And this year is going to be super important to be thinking about your pricing strategy, we've been talking about that to our clients. High-income households are driving most of the growth, right? But don't forget lower-income households. They do spend on toys. They have kids. As my colleague Julie says, they have birthdays. They have Christmas. They have to buy. But we need a price strategy that is addressing each part of the market right now. So you've got your high-end collectors, and you've got your people who are looking for value and good quality at a good price point. So just really go back, thinking about basics and not overselling, and really looking for the emotional hooks that are going to work for the different segments of people that you're trying to reach. Okay, so now let's just round it up. We got about 5 minutes left. So just to recap, right? These are the 6 trends I think you take out of here and think about how they apply to your business. Everybody's going to have a different strategy, but I think these are really important, right? So the big are not getting bigger, right? It's super competitive. You're going to take share from other people if you're succeeding in the market. There's an extremely high bar for IP. So that, I didn't mention this earlier, but the other knock-on of that means you may have to find an alternative way to get to market, right? Like the smartest companies are figuring out other ways to get to market, direct-to-consumer strategies, new partnerships, right? We can't depend on the same old, same old. And then this issue of diffusion of discovery. How do I reach my customers, and how do I get them once I do reach them? Your creative opportunities around global collaboration, not just global manufacturing, but global collaboration with the creative elements overseas. Looking for incubators and innovation. Where can you find innovation and growth in the market? Who is making smart and interesting things happen that you could then integrate into your strategy? And then just can't underline enough being original. I know that it's hard to innovate right now, and we are in a very conservative market, but innovation is going to help, and our people, our customers are going to want it. They do want it now. They want to be delighted. They're going to need our help because it's going to be very stressful this year and next year too. So this is the part where I just talk about data. Now, we're a data company, and this is not a sales pitch. We believe in data, obviously. But we think the uncertainty over the next 12 to 24 months and the speed with which things are going to be moving means that the companies that are going to be most successful at staying nimble are going to be using weekly data, or the best data they can afford, to understand, not just to react, but also to take advantage of opportunities that emerge quickly, right? So this is a very busy slide. There is a barcode at the end, QR code where you'll be able to download this, give us your name and download it. But I just want to point out, I think a lot of people look at what we do and think, oh my God, they're so big, I will never be able to afford them. But the truth is that we work with clients of all sizes in our company. We're global experts on licensing. We're working right now to build new solutions for licensing and to make accessible solutions for companies of all sizes. So no matter what question you have about your business, we can probably help you answer it. It's not really about the products or the data. Again, it's about the what of it and the why of it, and the fact that we really try hard to help our clients understand whatever their question is. So if you have a question, we probably have a tool and an expert to help you answer that question. So we would encourage you guys to work with us if you haven't, but also just sign up for our newsletters, because we actually send out quite a lot of content for free. So that's a really good way to get involved with us and just understand what we do. So my advice for surviving 2025 and beyond: keep in mind that you are going to be taking share if you're growing. So really think about share. Look at your competitors. Look at the companies that you think are doing really good work and figure out how to engineer yourself in that space. If you have an established IP, invest in good data. You need to understand what your competitors are doing, because it is going to move so fast this year, all of the economic forces and the consumer behavior. And collaborate with indie creators. I'm super, super bullish on the indie creator market. If you have a new IP, the traditional patterns of discovery, fanship, and audience, they're all shifting. You cannot depend on same old or established industry best practice right now. You need to be really nimble in your thinking and stay super open in how you think about reaching fans. I would encourage anybody with a new IP to have a direct-to-consumer strategy right out of the gate. And in fact, many times your direct-to-consumer strategy is how you're going to build your brand up to scale. In Kidscreen, we saw a lot of discussion about how to launch YouTube, right, as a strategy for IP. So just D2C is really important. And then looking for incubators of innovation, really trying to figure out what consumers want, what they're interested in, all of the global aesthetics. And then for all of you, thinking about innovation, time box strategies, limited releases, fan-only products, controlling your IP, because we didn't even touch on it today, but people ripping off your IP and delivering it back into the country from overseas without your permission is a big issue right now. And then reflect trends, but don't chase virality. Really try to make your own weather. Don't completely tune out from trends. Invest in paid advertising where it makes sense, right? I think that's important. But just don't worry as much about chasing virality. Try to really be original and make your viral moments and really focus on the emotion of the clients you're trying to reach, because that is really going to be what it takes in this market. Okay, so this is a collector. Tell us who you are. We'll be happy to send you the presentation. Brian, who's over here, and I, and maybe my team, will be over there to ask, happy to answer any questions or talk to you at all about what we talked about today. Thank you to Toy Fair for inviting us up here on the stage at Toy Fair University. And if you have anything you need from us, just let us know. Thanks very much.